The evening sky turned a deep shade of purple as James and Michelle Williams stepped out of their car in front of Le Chateau. Small white lights twinkled along the restaurant's entrance, reflecting in the puddles left by the afternoon rain. Michelle smoothed down her dark blue dress, the one she had bought specially for tonight. 10 years, she said, reaching for James's hand. Can you believe it? James squeezed her fingers and adjusted his tie. Best 10 years of my life. He looked at his wife, remembering the day they met in college. Michelle had been the smart girl in his economics class, always raising her hand with the right answers. Now she was a bank manager, and he ran his own accounting firm. They had built a good life together. Tonight was special. They had saved up and made reservations at Le Chateau 3 months in advance. The restaurant was known across the city for its 5-star rating, famous chef, and the 2-month waiting list for a table. Le Chateau wasn't just a place to eat. It was an experience, the kind people talked about for weeks afterward. Ready? James asked, offering his arm. Michelle nodded and they walked toward the grand entrance. The doorman, an older man with graying hair and a black uniform, opened the heavy wooden door. Michelle noticed his smile fade slightly when he saw them, but she pushed the thought away. Tonight was about celebration, not overthinking small moments. The inside of Le Chateau was even more impressive than the pictures they'd seen online. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting warm light over the dining area. The tables were covered with crisp white cloths, each set with shining silverware and delicate wine glasses. Soft classical music played in the background, just loud enough to fill the spaces between conversations. Good evening, James said to the young woman at the front desk. We have a reservation for Williams at 7:30. The hostess, whose name tag read Olivia, glanced down at her tablet, scrolling through the list. Her finger stopped and she looked up at them, then back down at the screen. Williams? She repeated, scrolling again. Yes, James and Michelle Williams, Michelle said. We confirmed yesterday. Olivia continued looking at her tablet, her eyebrows drawing together. One moment, please. She stepped away from the desk and walked quickly toward a man in a dark suit who stood near the bar. James and Michelle exchanged glances. Around them, other guests were being greeted warmly and led to their tables without delay. A couple who arrived after them was already being seated at a table by the window, one of the best spots in the restaurant. Everything okay? Michelle whispered. I'm sure it's fine, James replied. But he found himself standing a bit straighter, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit from his college days. The man in the suit approached, carrying the tablet Olivia had handed him. He was tall, with carefully styled hair and a thin mustache. His name tag identified him as Philippe, the maître d'. Good evening, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent. You said Williams? James nodded. Yes, reservation for 2 at 7:30. We made it 3 months ago. Philippe looked down at the tablet, his expression unreadable. Ah, yes. I see it now. There was a confusion in our system. He glanced around the restaurant, his eyes scanning the dining area. Please follow me. They followed Philippe through the main dining room, past tables of people enjoying their appetizers and sipping from wine glasses. Michelle noticed how conversations quieted as they walked by, how eyes followed them. She felt suddenly self-conscious, wondering if her dress wasn't fancy enough or if there was something else drawing attention. Philippe led them to a table in the far corner, near the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. It was the worst spot in the restaurant, noisy, with servers constantly rushing past, and far from the beautiful view of the garden that had been featured in all the restaurant's advertisements. Here we are, Philippe said, pulling out a chair for Michelle. James hesitated. I'm sorry, but when we made our reservation, we specifically asked for a table away from the kitchen. It's our 10th anniversary and we were hoping for something a bit more quiet. Philippe's smile tightened. I apologize, but as you can see, we are very busy tonight. This is the only table available at the moment. James looked around at the restaurant. While many tables were full, he could clearly see 3 empty tables near the windows, each beautifully set and waiting for guests. What about those tables? James asked, trying to keep his voice light and friendly. Philippe glanced toward the windows without really looking. Those are reserved for other guests who will be arriving shortly. Michelle felt her cheeks warm. She touched James's arm. It's okay. We can sit here. James looked at his wife, seeing the mix of emotions in her eyes, disappointment, embarrassment, and a silent plea not to make a scene. He pulled out her chair himself, nodding curtly to Philippe. "Very well," Philippe said, handing them leather-bound menus. "Your server will be with you shortly." He turned and walked away without the warm welcome they had seen him give to other guests. "Maybe those tables really are reserved," Michelle said quietly, opening her menu. James nodded, though he didn't believe it. This wasn't the first time they had experienced this sort of treatment, but it stung more tonight. He had wanted everything to be perfect for their anniversary. The menu prices were as high as they had expected, but they had prepared for that. They had saved up specifically for this night. James decided to focus on making the best of the situation. "What looks good to you?" he asked Michelle. Before she could answer, a loud crash came from the kitchen doors beside them, followed by the sound of shouting. A server rushed past their table, nearly bumping into Michelle's chair. Neither James nor Michelle mentioned it, but they both felt their special evening slipping away. Their server finally approached almost 15 minutes later, a young man named Thomas who seemed distracted and rushed. "Good evening," he said, barely looking at them. "Can I start you with some drinks?" Michelle smiled warmly. "Yes, we'd like a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, please. We're celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary tonight." Thomas jotted down the order without acknowledging Michelle's comment. "I'll be right back with water." As Thomas walked away, James reached across the table and took Michelle's hand. "Hey, remember our first date? That pizza place where the fire alarm went off and we had to finish our dinner on the curb outside?" Michelle laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "How could I forget? You gave me your jacket because it was freezing, and you still agreed to a second date despite the disaster. Because I saw how you handled it, with humor and grace. That's when I started falling for you." Michelle's eyes softened with the memory. They continued reminiscing, determined to create their own atmosphere despite the less-than-ideal surroundings. Around them, other diners received attentive service. Fresh bread brought to their tables, water glasses refilled promptly, and servers checking in regularly. 20 minutes passed before Thomas returned with their water and wine. He opened the bottle without the usual presentation and poured it quickly, splashing a few drops on the tablecloth. "Are you ready to order?" he asked, pen poised above his notepad. James ordered the filet mignon while Michelle chose the sea bass. Thomas took their menus and disappeared again. "I read online that they bring fresh bread to every table," Michelle said after a while, looking at the neighboring tables where baskets of steaming bread sat untouched. James flagged down a passing server, not Thomas, and asked about the bread. "Oh, I'm sorry," the server said, looking genuinely apologetic. "I'll bring some right away." 10 more minutes passed before a bread basket arrived. The rolls inside barely warm. Their appetizers, a small plate of scallops they decided to share, arrived 30 minutes later. The scallops were cold in the center, as if they had been sitting out too long before being served. Neither James nor Michelle mentioned it, simply eating quietly and trying to maintain their celebration. From their corner table, they watched as other guests received their main courses. People who had arrived after them were already halfway through their meals. James checked his watch. They had been at the restaurant for over an hour and their main courses were nowhere in sight. Michelle excused herself to use the restroom. As she walked through the restaurant, she noticed the dramatic difference in atmosphere from their corner to the main dining area. Near the windows, servers were attentive, smiling, and constantly checking on guests. The light was better, the noise from the kitchen non-existent. When she returned, James could see the hurt in her eyes despite her smile. He made a decision. "Let's talk to the manager," he said quietly. "This isn't right, and it's our anniversary. We deserve better service." Michelle hesitated, then nodded. They had both worked in customer service jobs during college. They knew how to be polite but firm when necessary. James raised his hand, trying to catch Thomas's attention, as he rushed past their table for the dozenth time. This was supposed to be their special night, and despite everything, James was determined to make it right. Unknown to them at a nearby table, a woman had been watching their situation unfold all evening, her phone occasionally raised to capture the increasingly obvious disparity in treatment. What would happen next would change everything, not just for James and Michelle, but for Le Chateau itself. James waved his hand again, trying to get their server's attention. Thomas walked by, carrying a tray of desserts to another table, seemingly not noticing them. The kitchen doors swung open and closed, each time sending a blast of noise and heat to their table. It had been nearly 45 minutes since they ordered their main courses. "This is ridiculous," James said quietly, his patience wearing thin. "I'm going to find the manager." As James stood up, Thomas finally approached their table. "Your meals are being prepared," he said, not making eye contact. "There's been a slight delay in the kitchen." "A slight delay?" Michelle repeated. "We've been waiting for almost an hour while people who came in after us are already eating dessert." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I'll check on your order again." "Actually," James said, his voice firm but controlled, "we'd like to speak with the manager, please." Thomas hesitated, then nodded and walked away. James sat back down and took a sip of his wine, which had grown warm in the glass. "I hate doing this," Michelle whispered, "but this isn't right." James reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's our anniversary. We saved for months to come here. We deserve the same service as everyone else." A few minutes later, a woman in a tailored black suit approached their table. Her name tag read Vanessa Moore, Manager. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening. I understand there's a concern about your service tonight?" Her voice was polite but cool. James nodded. "Yes, we've been here for over an hour and a half. Our main courses haven't arrived. We haven't received the same attention as other guests. And we're seated right next to the kitchen despite requesting a table by the window when we made our reservation 3 months ago." Vanessa glanced around the restaurant. "I apologize for the delay in your meal. Friday nights are very busy for us. As for the seating arrangement, we assign tables based on availability and reservation time." "We made our reservation 3 months ago," Michelle repeated, "and we confirmed it yesterday. I understand your frustration, but it's not just frustration," James interrupted, keeping his voice low. "We've been watching all evening. People who came in after us got better tables, immediate service, fresh bread, and their meals on time. The difference in how we've been treated compared to other guests is obvious." Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Williams, I can assure you that all our guests receive the same level of service." "That's simply not true," Michelle said. "And I think we both know why." A tense silence fell over the table. From nearby, they could feel the gaze of other diners who had begun to notice the conversation. Vanessa straightened her jacket. "Perhaps Le Chateau isn't the right fit for you this evening," she said, her voice dropping. "I'd be happy to cancel your order and you won't be charged for the wine." James and Michelle stared at her in disbelief. "Are you asking us to leave?" James asked. "I'm suggesting that if you're unhappy with our service, there are other restaurants that might better meet your expectations." Vanessa's tone made it clear that this wasn't a suggestion. Michelle felt her face grow hot with embarrassment and anger. "We're unhappy with being discriminated against, not with the restaurant itself." "I never said anything about discrimination," Vanessa replied quickly. "But I do need to ensure that all our guests have a pleasant dining experience without disruption." "Disruption?" James repeated, struggling to keep his voice level. "We've been sitting here quietly waiting for our food. How exactly are we being disruptive?" "Your tone is becoming confrontational," Vanessa said. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." At the neighboring tables, conversations had stopped. People were watching the scene unfold, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with open curiosity. A woman at a nearby table had her phone slightly raised, though neither James, Michelle, nor Vanessa noticed. James took a deep breath. He looked at Michelle, saw the hurt and humiliation in her eyes, and made a decision. He stood up slowly. "We'll go," he said, "but not because we did anything wrong. We'll go because no meal, no matter how fancy, is worth being treated this way." Michelle gathered her purse and stood as well, her back straight and her head held high despite the tears threatening to form in her eyes. "For the record," she said to Vanessa, "today is our 10th wedding anniversary. We saved for months to eat here. All we wanted was to be treated with the same respect as your other guests." Vanessa's expression flickered briefly, something like doubt crossing her face, but it was quickly replaced by professional detachment. "I'll have someone bring your coats," she said. As they walked through the restaurant toward the exit, Michelle felt the weight of dozens of eyes on them. The beautiful dining room that had seemed so magical when they arrived now felt hostile and cold. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her cry. At the coat check, a young attendant handed them their jackets with an apologetic smile. Outside, the night air was cool against Michelle's flushed face. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the sounds of traffic and distant conversations filling the awkward silence between them. "I'm so sorry," James finally said. "This night was supposed to be perfect." Michelle shook her head and took his hand. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." "We didn't do anything wrong. I know, but no buts," Michelle said firmly. "What just happened in there? That's not on us. That's on them." She squeezed his hand. "Now I'm starving and it's still our anniversary. Let's go somewhere else." James looked at his wife with admiration. After 10 years, she could still surprise him with her strength and grace under pressure. "Any ideas?" he asked. Michelle thought for a moment, then smiled. "Remember that little Italian place where we had our first anniversary dinner? The one with the checkered tablecloths and the owner who kept bringing us extra garlic bread?" "Antonio's," James nodded, returning her smile. "It's only about 10 blocks from here. Let's walk," Michelle suggested. "The night is nice and I could use some fresh air after all that." They started walking hand in hand down the street, the tension of the restaurant encounter gradually easing from their shoulders. Neither of them spoke much at first, both processing what had happened. "You know what's crazy?" Michelle finally said. "Part of me still feels like I did something wrong. Like maybe I wasn't dressed nicely enough or we didn't look like we belonged there." James stopped walking and turned to face her. "That's exactly what places like Le Chateau want you to feel. But the truth is we belonged there just as much as anyone else. We worked hard, we saved up, we made a reservation just like everyone else. The only difference was the color of our skin," Michelle finished. "I know. And logically I understand that's their problem, not ours. But emotionally, it still hurts." "It does," James agreed. "And it's okay to admit that. But we're not going to let it ruin our night." They continued walking, the city lights illuminating their path. They passed by shops closed for the evening and restaurants filled with people enjoying their Friday night meals. Through windows they could see families and friends laughing together, couples leaning close in conversation. 10 years, Michelle mused. "We've been through a lot together. The good, the bad, and the occasional really terrible restaurant experience," James added with a small smile. Michelle laughed, a genuine laugh that helped lift the heaviness from her heart. "And you know what? Through it all, I'd still choose you every time." They reached Antonio's, a small restaurant with warm yellow lights glowing from its windows. Through the glass, they could see the familiar checkered tablecloths and the walls lined with photos of Italy. As they opened the door, they were greeted by the rich aroma of garlic and tomato sauce. "James, Michelle," Antonio himself called from behind the counter, his round face breaking into a wide smile. "What a wonderful surprise. How long has it been?" "Too long," James replied warmly. "Your usual table is open," Antonio said, leading them to a quiet corner booth. "What brings you in tonight?" Michelle and James exchanged glances. "We're celebrating our anniversary," Michelle said. 10 years, Antonio exclaimed. "This calls for something special. Dinner is on the house tonight." "Oh no, we couldn't," James began. "I insist," Antonio said firmly. "You two were among my first customers when I opened this place. It would be my honor." As Antonio bustled away to get them wine, Michelle reached across the table and took James's hand. "This," she said, "is what it feels like to be welcomed." James nodded, the sting of the earlier rejection fading as they settled into the warm, familiar atmosphere of Antonio's. "Happy anniversary." "Michelle." "Happy anniversary, James." Neither of them knew that across town. A video was being uploaded to social media, a video that would change everything by morning. The next morning, James woke up to his phone buzzing continuously on the nightstand. He blinked at the clock, 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday. Who could be calling this early? He reached for the phone and saw 12 missed calls, 23 text messages, and over 50 notifications from social media apps. "What in the world?" he muttered, sitting up in bed. Michelle stirred beside him. "What's going on?" she asked sleepily. "I don't know. My phone's blowing up." He opened the first text message from his cousin Paul. "Just saw the video. Are you and Michelle okay? Call me." "Video? What video?" James clicked on another message, this one from a coworker. "Standing with you two. What happened at that restaurant was disgraceful." Michelle's phone started ringing now too. She grabbed it from her side of the bed and frowned at the screen. "It's my sister." "At this hour?" While Michelle answered her call, James opened his social media app. There at the top of his feed was a video with over 200,000 views already. The thumbnail showed Le Chateau's dining room, and in the corner of the frame, he could see himself and Michelle sitting at their table near the kitchen. "Oh no," he whispered, clicking play. The video, just under 4 minutes long, had been filmed by a woman sitting 2 tables away from them. It started when the manager approached their table and captured the entire conversation. The woman filming had positioned her phone discreetly, but the audio was surprisingly clear. Every word of their exchange with Vanessa was audible, including her suggestion that they leave and Michelle's revelation that it was their anniversary. The most damning part came at the end, as James and Michelle walked out with dignity. The camera panned around the restaurant, showing at least 3 empty tables by the windows, tables that Vanessa and Philippe had claimed were reserved. Then it showed 2 white couples being seated at those very tables less than 5 minutes after James and Michelle left. The caption read, "Witnessed blatant discrimination at Le Chateau tonight." This couple was treated poorly all evening, then asked to leave for politely requesting equal service. Watch to the end to see the reserved tables being given to other guests immediately after. "Tourists do not eat here, sans discrimination white in Le Chateau, James," Michelle said, her voice shaking slightly. She was looking at her own phone now. "The video's everywhere." James nodded, scrolling through the comments. Thousands of people had shared the video overnight. Many recounted similar experiences at Le Chateau or other upscale restaurants. Others expressed outrage and called for boycotts. Local community leaders had begun weighing in, promising to investigate. "Who filmed this?" Michelle asked, moving closer to look at James's screen. "Someone named Lily Chen, according to the username. I don't recognize her." "Me neither," Michelle said. She paused the video on a frame where the camera briefly showed the woman's reflection in a mirror. A young Asian woman in business attire. "I think she was sitting near us, but I don't remember seeing her." James's phone rang again. This time it was a local news station asking for an interview. He declined politely, still trying to process what was happening. "Should we make a statement?" Michelle asked after he hung up. "People are going to keep calling." James ran a hand over his face. "Let's just post something brief. I don't want this to take over our lives." Together they crafted a simple post. "Thank you for the support following the incident at Le Chateau. We're touched by your concern. What happened to us happens to people of color every day, usually without cameras present. We hope this leads to meaningful conversation and change." They posted it to both their accounts, then put their phones on silent. "Breakfast?" James suggested. "I think we both need coffee before dealing with any more of this." While they ate breakfast, trying to maintain some normalcy in their weekend routine, the video continued to spread. By noon, all the major local news outlets had picked up the story. Le Chateau's social media accounts were flooded with negative comments. Their online rating had dropped from 4.8 stars to 2.3 overnight. Around 1 o'clock, Le Chateau posted an official response. "We at Le Chateau are aware of the video circulating online. We take these allegations seriously and are conducting an internal review. Le Chateau has always prided itself on providing excellent service to all our guests without discrimination of any kind." The statement only fueled the fire. Comments poured in calling the response inadequate and tone-deaf. People began sharing screenshots of other negative reviews from minority customers that had previously been buried beneath hundreds of positive ones. By mid-afternoon, local TV news vans were parked outside Le Chateau. The reporter on Channel 7 stood in front of the restaurant's elegant facade. "The restaurant is surprisingly empty for a Saturday," she noted. Several sources tell us that many reservations have been canceled following the release of this video. The camera cut to a group of protesters gathering on the sidewalk, holding signs that read, "Boycott bigotry and discrimination has no place here." Among them was Lily Chen, the woman who had filmed the video. "I couldn't stay silent," she told the reporter. "What I witnessed was wrong. I travel for business and eat at restaurants alone frequently. I've experienced subtle discrimination myself. But watching how this couple was treated on what turned out to be their anniversary, I just couldn't look away." Back at home, James and Michelle were trying to process the rapid turn of events. They had planned to spend the weekend catching up on chores and watching movies. not becoming the center of a viral story about discrimination. I feel a little overwhelmed, Michelle admitted, curling up on the couch with a cup of tea. Part of me is glad people are talking about this issue, but another part just wants our privacy back. James nodded, sitting beside her. I know what you mean. I didn't expect any of this. I thought we'd just have a bad experience, maybe write a negative review and move on. Do you think anything will actually change at that restaurant? Michelle asked. I don't know, James replied honestly. But at the very least, people are now aware. That's something. Their doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. James peeked through the window and saw a middle-aged black woman standing on their porch. He didn't recognize her. Can I help you? He asked, opening the door partway. The woman smiled warmly. I'm Denise Wilson, city council member for this district. I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I wanted to speak with you and your wife personally about what happened at Le Chateau. James hesitated, then opened the door wider. Please, come in. Michelle joined them in the living room, and Councilwoman Wilson got straight to the point. First, let me say I'm sorry for what you experienced. It was unacceptable. Second, I want you to know that this video has started an important conversation in our city. We've noticed, Michelle said, gesturing to their phones, which hadn't stopped buzzing all day. The reason I'm here, Wilson continued, is that the city council has been working on an ordinance to address discrimination in public accommodations. This incident may help us finally get it passed. Would you be willing to speak at the next council meeting? James and Michelle exchanged glances. What exactly would that involve? James asked. Just sharing your experience in your own words, Wilson explained. Putting a real face to the issue often helps legislators understand its importance. Michelle thought about it. If sharing our story might help prevent this from happening to someone else, I think it's worth doing. James nodded in agreement. We'll be there. After Councilwoman Wilson left, more visitors arrived. Friends bringing food and offering support. Community members expressing solidarity. Even the owner of Antonio's, who insisted on delivering a homemade lasagna himself. Your anniversary dinner may have been ruined, Antonio said, but at least you won't have to cook this week. By evening, the story had reached national news. A popular news website ran a feature titled Dinner and Discrimination: The Reality of Dining While Black in America. It included stories from people across the country who had faced similar treatment at restaurants, hotels, and stores. I never wanted to be the face of this issue, Michelle told James as they prepared for bed that night. But maybe there's a purpose in all of this. Maybe, James agreed. And at least we're facing it together. Little did they know that across town, in the elegant home of Richard Pearson, owner of Le Chateau, an emergency meeting was taking place, one that would dramatically change the direction of this story. Richard Pearson stared at the laptop screen, watching the video for what felt like the 100th time that day. The elegant living room of his suburban home had become a crisis center. Empty coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches cluttered the glass coffee table. His public relations consultant, legal advisor, and the restaurant's executive chef sat around him with grim expressions. Play it again, Richard said, his voice tight. I want to be sure I'm not missing anything. Lisa, his PR consultant, sighed but clicked replay. Once more they watched James and Michelle Williams being asked to leave Le Chateau, saw them walk out with dignity, and witnessed the empty reserved tables being given to other guests minutes later. When the video ended, Richard closed the laptop with more force than necessary. This is a disaster. The numbers confirm that, Lisa said, scrolling through her tablet. 68 canceled reservations for tonight alone. Our social media mentions are up 3,000%, almost all negative. Local news has been outside the restaurant all day. The hashtag Boycott Le Chateau is trending in the region. What about legal exposure? Richard asked, turning to David, his attorney. David removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It doesn't look good. The video provides compelling evidence of discriminatory treatment. If the Williams couple decides to file a lawsuit, they'd have a strong case. Public accommodation laws are clear. But we've never had an official policy of discrimination, Richard protested. I've never instructed anyone to treat customers differently based on race. It doesn't have to be an official policy, David explained patiently. Courts look at patterns of behavior and outcomes. If staff consistently treats minority customers differently, even without explicit instructions, the business is still liable. What about Vanessa? And Philippe? Richard asked. They're the ones in the video. Chef Martin, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. They're not the only ones, Richard. You know that. Richard shot him a warning look, but Martin continued. I've worked in your kitchen for 8 years. I've seen how certain customers get seated by the kitchen or bathroom. I've heard the comments staff make. I've noticed how some tables get the attention of our best servers while others wait. That's not... It is, Martin insisted. And it starts at the top. You set the tone, Richard. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at his manicured lawn. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, he said quietly. No one responded. Richard turned back to face the group. So what do we do? Close the restaurant? Not necessarily, Lisa said. But we need a substantive response, not just a PR statement. People see through those immediately. I have to make a public apology, Richard realized. Lisa nodded. Yes, but that's just the start. You need concrete actions that show you're serious about changing the culture at Le Chateau. Meanwhile, across town, James and Michelle were having dinner with Paul and his wife Tanya. They had declined several media requests but couldn't avoid talking about the situation with family. Still can't believe how big this has gotten, Tanya said, passing the salad bowl. A friend in Atlanta texted me about it. It's gone national. It's not just about us anymore, Michelle said. People are sharing similar experiences from all over the country. It's like this video gave permission for others to speak up. James nodded. The restaurant's been closed for 2 days now. Their Yelp page has so many new negative reviews that the site had to freeze ratings. Have they reached out to you at all? Paul asked. No, James replied. Just that generic statement about investigating the incident. Which means they're hoping it blows over, Tanya said with a frown. Michelle's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and raised her eyebrows. It's Councilwoman Wilson. The city council meeting has been moved to the community center because so many people want to attend. James squeezed her hand. Are you sure you still want to speak? Michelle nodded. I do, but I'm nervous about it. You'll do great, Tanya assured her. Just speak from the heart. 3 days after the incident, Le Chateau remained closed. The official explanation was staff training, but everyone knew the real reason. That afternoon, Richard Pearson made his first public statement via video. My name is Richard Pearson, owner of Le Chateau. He began, looking directly into the camera. He appeared tired, the confident restaurant owner replaced by a man facing a personal crisis. I'm speaking today about the incident that occurred at my restaurant last Friday evening. Richard took a deep breath. First, I want to apologize to James and Michelle Williams for the treatment they received while trying to celebrate their anniversary. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility. He continued, I've spent the past few days watching the video, reading comments, and most importantly, listening to my staff. What I've learned has been difficult to accept. While I never created an explicit policy of discrimination, I allowed a culture to develop where some guests were valued more than others. Richard's voice grew more emotional. I've always prided myself on running a prestigious establishment. But I now realize that my definition of prestigious carried implicit biases I wasn't conscious of. That stops today. He outlined a series of changes: anti-bias training for all staff, revisions to seating and service policies, hiring a diversity consultant, and creating a community advisory board to provide ongoing feedback. These steps are just the beginning, Richard concluded. I know actions speak louder than words. Le Chateau will reopen next week as a restaurant that truly welcomes everyone. I hope to earn back your trust, and I specifically hope the Williams family will give us a chance to make this right. The video quickly circulated online, drawing mixed reactions. Some praised Richard's candor and commitment to change. Others remained skeptical, calling it damage control. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. That evening, James received an unexpected email from Richard Pearson, requesting a private meeting. He showed it to Michelle. What do you think? Should I go? He asked. Michelle considered the question. If he's genuinely trying to make changes, maybe it's worth hearing him out. But you don't owe him anything. James thought about it overnight and replied the next morning, suggesting they meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Richard agreed immediately. When James arrived at the coffee shop, Richard was already there. sitting at a corner table without his usual confident demeanor. He stood when he saw James. "Thank you for coming," Richard said, extending his hand. James shook it briefly and sat down. "I'm listening." Richard pushed aside his untouched coffee. "First, I want to apologize to you personally, not just through a video. What happened to you and your wife was wrong." James nodded but remained silent. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Richard continued. "I started Le Chateau 15 years ago. I wanted it to be the kind of place where people celebrated special occasions, where they felt important and valued." He paused. "Somewhere along the way, I developed a very narrow view of who those important people were. That became clear to everyone when the video came out," James said. "Yes," Richard admitted. "Seeing it through others' eyes, I was ashamed. I didn't recognize my restaurant or myself." "So what now?" James asked. "You've announced some changes, but how do I know this isn't just about saving your business?" Richard looked directly at James. "That's a fair question. The honest answer is that at first it was about saving the business. But these past few days have forced me to confront things about myself I've never had to face before." He hesitated. "My daughter called me after seeing the video. She was crying, asking how the restaurant she grew up visiting could treat people that way. That hit me hard." James could see the emotion in Richard's eyes. "I can't change overnight," Richard continued, "but I'm committed to doing better. Not just with policies, but personally. That's why I wanted to meet with you. Not to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses, but to listen." James considered his words. "The City Council is discussing a new anti-discrimination ordinance next week. Michelle and I are speaking at the meeting. Your support would make a difference." Richard nodded slowly. "I'll be there." As James walked out of the coffee shop, he wasn't sure if Richard was truly changed or just saying what needed to be said. Only time would tell. But something had shifted, not just at one restaurant, but in the larger conversation about who belongs in which spaces and who gets to decide. That night, as James recounted the meeting to Michelle, she asked the question that had been on both their minds. "Do you think anything will really change?" "I don't know," James replied honestly. "But for the first time, it feels like people are actually listening." 6 months had passed since that night at Le Chateau. The community center was packed for the evening's event, with people spilling into the hallway. Local news cameras stood ready to capture the proceedings. A banner hung above the stage. "Community Conversations Breaking Barriers in Business." Michelle smoothed down her dress nervously as she and James waited backstage. "I didn't expect this many people," she whispered. James nodded, equally surprised by the turnout. What had begun as a personal experience had grown into something much larger. The viral video of their treatment at Le Chateau had sparked a citywide conversation about discrimination in businesses. Tonight marked a milestone in that ongoing dialogue. Councilwoman Wilson approached them with a warm smile. "Ready? You two are the reason all these people are here tonight." "No pressure," James joked, adjusting his tie. On the other side of the stage, Richard Pearson stood alone, reviewing his notes. He looked different from the confident restaurant owner of 6 months ago. Humbler, more thoughtful. He glanced up and caught James's eye, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. The lights dimmed and Councilwoman Wilson walked onto the stage to welcome everyone. 6 months ago, an incident at a local restaurant forced our community to confront an uncomfortable truth. Discrimination doesn't always announce itself with signs or slurs. Sometimes it's subtle. A table by the kitchen, slower service, smaller courtesies withheld. But its impact is no less real. She continued. Tonight, we celebrate the positive changes that have emerged from that difficult moment. Our city council unanimously passed the Public Accommodation Fairness Act. 48 local businesses have completed voluntary bias training. And most importantly, people are talking, really talking, about creating spaces where everyone belongs. Wilson introduced the panel, James and Michelle Williams, Richard Pearson, Lily Chen, who had filmed the video, and Dr. Thompson, a sociology professor from the local university who specialized in studies of discrimination. As James and Michelle took their seats, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The weeks following the incident had been intense. Their story had been featured in national news. They'd received thousands of messages from people sharing similar experiences. Some businesses had reached out for advice on improving their practices. But tonight wasn't about rehashing painful memories. It was about what had happened since Dr. Thompson spoke first, providing context about the subtle ways discrimination manifests in public spaces. What made this case so powerful was its visibility, she explained. These experiences happen daily, but rarely are they captured on video and shared so widely. Lily Chen described what prompted her to record that night. I was dining alone when I noticed what was happening at the table near mine. As someone who has experienced discrimination myself, though in different ways, I felt I couldn't just watch silently. When it was Richard's turn to speak, a tense silence fell over the room. He cleared his throat. 6 months ago, I was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about my restaurant and myself. I could have issued a standard apology, made some superficial changes, and hoped people would forget. Many businesses do exactly that. He paused, looking directly at the audience. Instead, I chose a harder path. With the help of many in this room, including James and Michelle Williams, who had every reason to want nothing to do with me or my restaurant, I began the process of genuine change. Richard outlined the steps taken at Le Chateau, a complete revision of seating and service policies, regular anti-bias training for all staff, and the creation of a community advisory board that met monthly to provide feedback. Most significantly, he had hired a new diverse management team, including Vanessa's replacement, a Black woman with extensive hospitality experience. These changes weren't just good ethics. They were good business, Richard noted. After an initial drop in customers, we're now seeing higher numbers than before. People want to support businesses that reflect their values. Michelle spoke next. When we were asked to leave Le Chateau that night, I never imagined where it would lead. The hardest part wasn't the incident itself, but deciding what to do afterward. We could have stayed silent, filed a lawsuit, or simply moved on with our lives. She looked at James, then back at the audience. Instead, we chose to engage with Richard, with the media, with our community. That choice wasn't always easy. There were difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and days when we just wanted our privacy back. But I believe it was worth it. James nodded in agreement. The lesson for me has been that change is possible, but it takes more than just calling out problems. It requires people willing to listen, reflect, and do the hard work of changing not just policies, but hearts and minds. During the question and answer session, a local business owner stood up. This is all well and good for a fancy restaurant that can afford consultants and training. What about small businesses like mine? How are we supposed to implement these ideas? Dr. Thompson addressed the question. That's why the Community Resource Center was created. It provides free training materials and workshops specifically designed for small businesses. Several local companies have volunteered mentors to help others navigate these changes. Another audience member asked Richard directly, "Do you actually believe in what you're doing, or is this all for show?" A hush fell over the room at the blunt question. Richard didn't seem offended. "That's fair," he said. 6 months ago, I would have given you a polished answer. Today, I'll just be honest. I started this process to save my business, but somewhere along the way, it became personal. He continued, "My daughter is in college now. When she saw that video, she called me in tears asking how the restaurant where she'd grown up could treat people that way. That hit me hard. I realized I wanted to build something she could be proud of, that I could be proud of. So yes, I believe in what we're doing, but I also recognize that this is a journey. I'm still learning every day." After the formal program ended, people mingled at the reception. James and Michelle found themselves surrounded by well-wishers, including a surprising number of former Le Chateau employees who had stories of their own. One former server approached them shyly. "I worked there for 2 years before quitting. What happened to you happened to others too, but nobody was filming those times. I just wanted to say thank you." Later, as the crowd thinned, Richard approached them with a small gift bag. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, handing it to Michelle. Inside was a handwritten card and a gift certificate. "It's for your next anniversary," Richard explained. "At Le Chateau, if you're willing to give us another chance. Any table in the house is yours." Michelle and James exchanged glances. "We'll think about it," James said honestly. As they drove home that night, Michelle was quiet, looking out at the city lights. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "I'm thinking about how something painful turned into something meaningful," she replied, "and about whether we should accept Richard's invitation." "And?" "I think we should," Michelle decided. "Not because we owe him anything, but because it's important to acknowledge genuine effort to change. That night wasn't just about a bad meal or poor service. It was about who belongs in which spaces. By going back, we make a statement that we belong everywhere. James nodded slowly. I agree. Plus, I hear they have a new chef who's doing amazing things with the menu. Michelle laughed, the tension of the evening finally breaking. Always thinking about food. Speaking of which, James said, want to stop for ice cream on the way home? I think we earned a celebration tonight. As they pulled into the ice cream shop parking lot, Michelle took James's hand. You know what I realized tonight? That video captured one of our worst moments, being humiliated and asked to leave. But it also captured our best, the way we handled it with dignity and turned it into something positive. That's us, James said with a smile, making the best of things one anniversary at a time. They walked into the ice cream shop hand in hand, ready for whatever came next, the hard conversations, the ongoing work, and yes, even a return to Le Chateau. Because change, real change, happens one step, one meal, one conversation at a time.